Welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast, where we talk to C-level leaders from across the payments landscape. We'll be discussing the products and services that impact the payment space today, as well as trends and predictions for the future of payments. We will also hear stories from our guests about their journeys to the top.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast. I'm your host, Greg Myers, and on today's show, we have a very special guest, Mike Hudack, the CEO of Sling Money. So, Mike, thank you for being here and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Really happy to be here.
Great. So if you don't mind, let's start out having you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, maybe where you grew up, where you went to school, where you currently live, just a few things like that.
Yeah, for sure. I grew up in Connecticut mostly, kind of like in an orbit around New York City, really. So I lived in kind of like Fairfield County, Connecticut for a little while, Westchester, New Jersey. And then I dropped out of high school when I was 15, before I was legally allowed to do it. And I worked at a startup and then moved to New York City and lived in New York for a number of years, working as like a programmer and sysadmin. And then I started an online video company in New York in like '05. And then that like merged with another company and Disney bought the combined thing. I went out to California and went to work at Facebook, where I did product for a long time. I kind of worked on like profile and identity, and then I led ads product for a while. I met a Brit in New York. She grew up in London. She was living in New York. I dragged her to California. She doesn't like it when I say that. And then after a few years in San Francisco, she was like, I want to go back. I thought she meant New York, but we ended up moving to London. So I've been here 10 years now, 10, 11 years. I live in a village outside of Cambridge in the UK now, and my office is in London. After moving here, I stayed with Facebook for a while, and then I worked at a company called Deliveroo, which is just getting bought by DoorDash now. It's basically like DoorDash in Europe and the Middle East and parts of Asia. And then I was chief product officer at Monzo, which is like a neobank in the UK. And then I started Sling a couple years ago after discovering stablecoins.
Well, let's talk about Sling Money. So tell the audience what Sling does.
Well, so I had this experience about 3 years ago of moving USDC from the UK to San Francisco. And the payment itself was instant and free, but everything else about the experience was not great, to be honest with you. Like, it felt like using a Unix command line from the 80s. You're kind of like stitching everything together, and you need to go through this whole like crazy IDV process and copy and paste these addresses and all that stuff. The underlying transfer was instant and free. And I had this moment where I was like, oh, I know how to fix everything that is wrong with this, but the thing which is right with this is like world changing. The fact that I can move value, 3,000 miles, 4,000 miles like this with the tap of a button and my friend gets it immediately is unbelievable. And so with Sling Money, what we're building is the macOS or the iPhone or stablecoins. So like the really easy to use, really fast, great user experience. And we want to get to the point where anyone in the world can send money to anyone else in the world instantly with a couple of taps without having to worry about currency at all. It's all just abstracted away. You don't need to think about it. You don't need to think about or know anything about the recipient's bank details. The transfer is basically instant and free, or as close to free as possible. So just like sending a message. And I was talking to somebody the other day, went for a walk actually with one of the guys who founded Skype, and we were talking about how, in the old days, you had long distance phone calls, you had international phone calls. You thought about this all the time. And money is still stuck in that world. You would never say, oh, I'm going to make a long distance phone call. Don't stay on the phone. It's long distance,
Right.
I grew up with that. We're moving to a world where nobody's going to say making an international payment anymore. It should all just be the same thing. I'm sending money. It should be instant free. And that's what we're doing. We're doing it with the Solana blockchain and stablecoins and taking all the friction out of it.
So your customers are more on the consumer side.
It's all consumer. Yeah, totally.
And how are you acquiring those consumers?
It's a great question. So we think about this a lot like WhatsApp. Like you start with the highest friction thing initially. So like WhatsApp grew in Spain because like Telefonica was they charged a lot of money for international texting. They charged a lot of money for sending like an MMS or whatever. And that was a huge opportunity. And then, WhatsApp texting is ultimately like a social activity. And so if you get a couple people, if you solve a big problem for a couple people doing that, they start sharing it with other people and you start growing geometrically. So that's the way that we think about it. Get one person inviting another person. You obviously have to bootstrap your network initially. So, we have some marketing tactics for just like getting lots of people onto the platform very quickly. And then from there, you kind of evolve from getting lots of people on to, just kind of like that rolling barrage of friends inviting friends. After you work at Facebook, everything looks like social software. Every acquisition strategy looks the same,
Right. So the consumer just downloads an app. So maybe walk through kind of what that.
So you download the app, you sign up using your like Google account or your Apple account, depending on what kind of phone you're on. Verify your phone number. You go through a very easy identity verification flow. So in the US, that's like a database check with like name, social security number, address, selfie. In Africa, it's a selfie and a photo of your ID. It just, it varies depending on where you are. We do that IDV check in about 10 countries or something like that, which is pretty wild.
Seems like that's a heavy lift.
For sure. So you get through that IDV check and then you generate a self-custodial Solana wallet, which is stored on your device and backed up seamlessly with a third-party partner of ours. We can never access your wallet. It's very important. And then you're dropped into the app, and now you have a Solana wallet that can take stablecoins, and you can add money to it using a local payment method wherever you are in the world. We have 75 countries worth of local payment methods where you can add money. So in the US or Europe, that's predominantly debit card or like a bank transfer in. Other countries, like in Kenya, it's M-Pesa, which is mobile money. In Brazil, it's Pix, and so on and so forth. It's just whatever local payment method. And what happens is you transfer your fiat in, and then you get a stable coin in your wallet. And depending on where you are, that might be a US dollar stablecoin or a euro stablecoin. You can then send that stablecoin to whoever you want. If they're on Sling, you can do it. You can just find them in the directory. And you can search the directory, find them. We show that they've been like ID verified, all that kind of thing. And you can just send the money to them. It takes 3 seconds. Literally just 3 seconds. And then they can off-ramp that money. They can get it in their bank account or whatever super quickly. Again, we support local payment methods in 75 countries where you can get Kenyan shillings or Brazilian real or euros or Polish zloty or pounds or whatever you want. And 99% of those transfers are like a minute or less. We integrate with the fastest mechanism. So the end-to-end, like I can move money between my own accounts in Europe and the US in about 45 seconds. And it's super smooth like butter, and just like really, really easy to use. And you never have to think about stable coins or blockchains or wallet addresses or anything like that. It's just easy.
So what is the typical use case? Why would someone in the US be sending money to someone in Africa or even Europe for, just why do they typically do that? What kind of gets that started?
So there's a range of use cases. I mean, this is one of the biggest markets in the world, and it ranges from on one end of the spectrum, kind of like a self-transfer. So like I live a little bit between the UK and the US, and I go to New York a lot. I grew up in the US. My family is here. My immediate family is here in the UK. And so I very, very regularly move money between the US and the UK in order to pay bills, pay credit cards, pay rent, whatever, like all the time. And there are around the world, millions and millions and millions of people like me who straddle multiple economies, multiple currencies, and need to move money between the two. So that's a big use case. And then there are people who send money to friends and family abroad. That is a lot of activity, obviously. That is a huge market. And, you might have somebody, you can imagine that I would send money to my dad back in Connecticut to help out with something or for a gift or whatever. So that, again, is just like a huge use case. And then I really believe that there's a new wave of like sending money internationally has been so difficult for so long and so expensive that it really restricts the reasons why people do it, the frequency with which people do it. So like if you talk to people who like send money back to family on a regular basis or whatever, they do it once per month because it's just a pain. It's like paying your bills at the end of the month. You sit down at your desk and you open up your, whatever, your computer, and you're like, okay, I'm going to do it. It takes a while and it's expensive. It's a chore. I really strongly believe that if you make it really easy and you make it really fast, people will do it more and for more things. We had a thing happen on Twitter a little while ago, which was hilarious, which is like a user of ours in the Netherlands tweeted that Sling was amazing because you could buy somebody a beer from thousands of miles away. And a user of ours in Kenya saw the tweet and replied to it and said, buy me a beer. The guy did. He sent him $2, which is like, translates to however many shillings it is to buy a beer in Nairobi. And it arrived about 3 seconds later. And the guy replied to the Twitter thread saying, hey, I bought the beer. And the guy in the Netherlands says, send me proof of beer. And he did. He sent a photo of the beer. And it's just like, you just couldn't do that a few years ago. It's incredible.
It really should be that easy, though, right?
It should be that easy.
Right. So I don't know if you have competition, but maybe if you do, like what makes it different and unique? Or another way of answering is, what did people do before this kind of solution came on?
Yeah. So, there's the traditional, I think about this in terms of generations. So there's like the old school way of moving money internationally, which a lot of banks still use, which is, SWIFT, the SWIFT network, or correspondent banking, and, all of that kind of stuff. And it takes a while and people charge fees along the way. And that's kind of like your first generation of international payment. So that's what JP Morgan Chase or HSBC or, all these people do, basically. Then there's like a second generation, really cool fintechs that have built great consumer experiences around international money transfer, which is like smoother and easier than that. So Wise, Revolut, those kind of guys. And they're less expensive than the traditional banks. And what they've done is they built up these kind of incredible kind of like fiat networks around the world. So they'll, have somebody who can settle, Brazilian real for them, and somebody who can settle pounds or euros or whatever. And they kind of move around with a good UI there. And then now there's kind of like a set of people who are building this on stablecoins, where I think it's better, faster, and cheaper, easier. The infrastructure is easier. All this stuff is easier. And there's probably, there's Phantom. There are a bunch of kind of like crypto wallet-y kind of people. And there are a couple of people building like regional neobanks on top of these rails. So like a Revolut for Mexico or something like that. I think we're the only people crazy enough to try to build like WhatsApp for money in like 100 something countries at the same time. Like you really have to be insane.
Right. Well, where do you see sort of, if you step back and look at payments as a whole or kind of the fintech space, where do you see that headed in the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
Look, I grew up with technology in a world where once something becomes fast and once it becomes cheap, there's no going back. So I really believe that fast, high quality blockchains and stablecoins are here to stay in a really meaningful way. I just think that like most financial technology in the future is going to be based, most experiences are going to be based on this technology. And Bill Gates has this saying, I'm going to paraphrase poorly, that people overestimate the speed of change and they underestimate the size of the change. I think that like in however many years it takes, I don't know if it's 5 or 10 or 15, pretty much everything is going to be blockchain based. And the products and the experiences are going to look dramatically different than the products and the experiences today. They're going to look a lot more like a digital product experience and a lot less like a banking product experience. And that'll be a result of the technology. It's going to be a result of everybody being on the same database. Everybody's money is going to be on the same database. It's one shared ledger, not all these separate ledgers. And ledger movements between people, between countries, between currencies are as simple as a couple lines of code and just happen instantly and cost a tenth of a penny. That is fundamental, and it also is more accessible, which means that more people can build great user experiences on top of this. And I think that means the products are going to look more like WhatsApp and Gmail and Slack and whatever than they look like HSBC or my JP Morgan Chase app. it'll be unrecognizable, to be honest with you. And we've seen this with like video. Like I worked in online video back in 2005, and I actually did my first work on online video in like 2000. I worked at a company called Sudo, which was doing live broadcasting of like 10 channels from New York City on the internet in 50, in real video when nobody even had 56K modems yet. Like everybody had 28A modems at home. So the pixels, when you watch this thing, were like this big. You couldn't see anything. And there was like a channel called 88 Hip Hop and all this stuff. And it failed. But the guy who started it, this guy Josh Harris, like knew that like all television was going to work this way in the future. And he was 100% right. And, the cable people and the satellite people were like, oh, I don't know, and they had all the reasons for why this might not be true. And now you look at today, it's 25 years later. I mean, we're recording this thing. It's going to go on YouTube. It's going to go on Apple Podcasts. It's going to go on Spotify. All those things have come true. My home TV is all streaming now. The whole thing is just streaming. So that happened over the course of like 20 years. YouTube launched in 2005, like all this stuff kind of happened. And I can't tell you exactly the moment where everything flipped. I'm not sure if anybody can, but it flipped. And that is the same thing that's going to happen across all financial services, I think, domestic and international.
Do you think so? So we talk a lot about, even on this show, is like removing the friction from transactions, or even from just the whole experience, not just transactions, just the consumer experience, shopping, buying from merchants, the friction. I mean, it becomes the Uber experience, right? You don't even know the payment happens. I mean, do you see kind of what you're doing, making that frictionless, moving from consumer to B2B, to where any B2B, and I don't mean business to business necessarily transaction, but consumer to business as opposed to consumer to consumer?
For sure. I think that like the real efficiency from this technology comes when you don't have to transition between, like fiat in a separate database and like a stable coin on a blockchain. And everything just stays in network. The on-ramp and the off-ramp are the kind of expensive and complicated pieces. Everything on is cheap and easy. So for sure, like it's going to be important for us and for others to facilitate not just peer-to-peer payments, but consumer to business, business to business, business to consumer. It's really just a matter of sequencing. But like I imagine that a very large percentage, again, over some period of time, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what is going to happen, but a very large percentage of online purchases are going to be entirely on-chain and never taken out. Why would at some point, why would you take it out? And for sure, like as we get to scale and as we get to critical mass in different markets in different ways, those features, I think, become incredibly important. They're important for the business model. They're important for consumer value. And they're just kind of like an inevitable part of where this technology goes.
Well, you talked a little bit about why this was a problem that you saw, kind of a way to solve it. What did you do? Like, why did you do this? Why did you take the leap of faith to start this company and do what you're doing?
I've been really incredibly lucky to work on a bunch of really interesting problems over my career. So I worked on online video and online media. I worked on computer security, social media. I did advertising and brought a lot of advertising dollars online at Facebook back in the day. Worked on food delivery and I worked on banking. And there are a couple of different things here. Like one is that in my career, I haven't seen very many opportunities this big or this amazing that like have this kind of potential to change the world. And I think that connecting everyone in the world to an instant financial system has the potential to do so much good if you think about all the people in the world who don't have access to the financial system right now in a meaningful way, or it's very expensive, it holds a lot of people back. There's just a tremendous amount of social good that can come out of building a thing like this. And that's very appealing. It's a huge technology-driven paradigm shift. And that's the stuff that gets me out of bed in the morning. Like that's the stuff that I find fascinating. And I feel like all the best things I've ever built have been at that kind of like the edge of this sort of thing. And I feel like the combination of experience that I have of building like social media and like social networks and working at a regulated financial company and building consumer technology, but also having experience building the back end for these things, it's like my whole career and set of experiences like builds up to to this thing. Then when you have that experience, you're like, you look around and I had that experience moving the money from like the UK to California or whatever, and it's instant and free. And I was like, well, I know how to solve all these problems. I asked, like, why isn't anyone else doing this? And I couldn't really figure it out. Now a lot of people are trying to do it, but we saw it early and started building early. And I imagined myself kind of like 5 or 10 years in the future, and I imagined how I would feel under a bunch of different scenarios. So if I didn't do this and somebody else tried, how would I feel? How would I feel if they succeeded or they failed? How would I feel if I didn't do this and nobody did it? How would I feel if I did it and I failed? How would I feel if I did it and I failed and somebody else succeeded? How would I feel if I did it and I succeeded? And the answer was like really clear that I would like feel pretty bad in pretty much every scenario in which I didn't try to do this. In some of the scenarios where I try to do this, I would also feel bad, but like no worse if I didn't try. And in some of those scenarios, I'm very happy. So, you do that and you're like, well, I have just no choice. Like I have to build this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some things you're passionate about? So maybe one work-related passion and one personal passion.
Well, I love building stuff. Like this is part of my work. I just love building new things. I love building things that people use. I love building things that people get value out of. In some way, I don't really care if it's like food delivery or it's like, advertisements that help small businesses sell their product, or if it's, instant transfers that help people, live their life and move money faster and cheaper and everything. But it has to be something that makes a difference for a person. And it has to be something like new and novel, which is like hard to figure out how to do. And I just like that. I love that. I love that. And I love the detail of it. I love the intricacy of it. I love the puzzle. Fantastic. Sometimes very hard, but beautiful. And then personally, I've got 3 kids. I've got a 9-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 15-month-old. And they're great. We do Lego. The 5-year-old and we have a table in my office, and when they get home from school, if I'm not on a call or something, we do Lego for a few minutes, and then we do it again before they go to bed, and it's great. It's absolutely wonderful. And we we also we live in the UK, but we kind of like throw a baseball around, play catch, and all that stuff. And that is also just like the best thing in the world. It's amazing.
So maybe someone comes to you, they're right out of college and they're looking at payments or fintech as an industry to go into. And obviously you have a very wide background of different, verticals or industries. But if they came to you and said, hey, I want to build a career in fintech because of, the way it is today and the technology and the money and everything, what would you tell them they need to do to be successful?
I think there are multiple pieces here. So the first thing I think is to go and work at the best company you can find. Like you want to go and play for the Yankees. You want to go and work at a place which is just at the top of their game so that you can learn how they do everything. And those habits will serve you well for the rest of your career. You will learn a set of like good habits, right? And not just like in doing the work, but how to think, how to interact with other people, how to break down problems and solve them and all that kind of stuff. So that's, I think, really important. Like pick that place really, really well. In a lot of ways, it doesn't matter if it's big or small. It's just like somewhere that they're good and you really, truly respect them. And that's more important than title. It's more important than compensation. It's more important than the work that you do. Super important. Then when you get there, go and work on the impactful stuff that is painful and nobody else wants to do. Find the problems which are everybody else avoids, but that if you get them done, create a tremendous amount of value, and people will respect you deeply for finding that, going through the pain and solving it and seeing that opportunity. I'll give you an example. Like one of the things that I worked on at Facebook was some of our logging was incorrect across a bunch of different things. And it was insane. You had to record like each event for clicking like or commenting or sharing or, every impression across like 17 different clients, like all these different like iOS. I had to get like 10 people into a war room with like a giant spreadsheet for like a month, literally just going through every event recorded across all of Facebook. It was the most boring, tedious, terrible work, But at the end we could say, oh, we got this right and it was wrong before. And that was unbelievably valuable for driving trust within the organization, outside of the organization, with our customers, with everybody else. It was something nobody else wanted to do, but created a tremendous amount of value. To find those things, do them. And those are the things, running into the burning building, doing the work that nobody else wants to do. Those are the things that then put your career on a great trajectory and people trust you and they want to do stuff with you. I feel like if you do those two things and then you chase the things that create value and you enjoy, obviously you have to do those things that are boring too, but work on problems that matter and you'll do great.
I think that's great advice. So, Mike, we've covered a lot of ground about the company, the industry, what fascinating things you guys are doing. Is there anything else you'd like to cover before we wrap up the show?
No, I think, your question has been great, and I've really enjoyed this. I think if I were to leave people with one takeaway, it's probably that I think that international payments are going the way of the long-distance phone call. They're going to be ubiquitous. They're going to be fast. They're going to be the same as making a local payment. Everything is going instant and free and a couple taps. And that's a huge paradigm shift that I think people haven't totally adjusted to yet. But that's the fun part, And I'm just really grateful. Thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. I know you're very busy, so thanks again for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And to all you listeners out there, I thank you for your time as well. And until the next story.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Leaders in Payments podcast. Make sure you visit our website at leadersinpayments.com, where you can subscribe to the show and where you'll find our show notes. If you enjoyed listening, please share on your social channels as well.